Too bad Gary Larson doesn't do his Far Side comics anymore.
All right, well, I pushed
He'd have a
record.
field day with AI.
I did. Okay, good. All right, so I did push recording, so we are recording. Excellent. So I am thrilled to kick us off here and get started. I don't know, Pat, what the number of participants are now. It looks like 10. We had over nearly 50 registrations for this event today. So that tells us a couple of things. One is that tells us that we've hit on something, and that is this conversation around disclosure might be one that a lot of folks are interested in. So if that is the case, I want to just tell you that we will continue this conversation. If we feel like today's comments and the opportunity we have to talk today leads into another one of these B2B meetings where we continue on this conversation, we're okay with that. So I want you to know that. I'm going to start off by introducing myself. My name is Beth Butler Fatal, Executive Director of Disability in North Carolina. And with me today is Pat Kuehl, our Operations Director. And we've got a few slides, as is typical, to share with you today around kind of who we are as an organization. And then we'll jump into our topic for today. I also, again, want to just encourage you to do what you need to do to engage with those on today's call, whether that's in the chat feature of Zoom platform. Please, we want, as Pat said at the beginning, we really want you guys to be talking today, and we don't want this to be all about our conversation. So
to that end, Beth, I want to just interrupt to say that Janet is telling us that she had a little difficulty with signing in. So we may have a little bit of stumbles as people kind of find their way in today.
Okay.
Luckily, we're recording it.
We are. And yes. And so I know a lot of people too are jumping back from Teams to Zoom, and sometimes that happens as well. So I appreciate that feedback, Janet. Thank you. So who is Disability in North Carolina? We are a private nonprofit serving businesses across North Carolina that are all focused on this topic of disability engagement. And so we have been around since 2012. I have been in this role as executive director since about 2017. And we are one of 16 affiliates of the National Organization of Disability in. So there are a network of affiliates that kind of do what we do here in North Carolina across the country. Disability In is our national partner and connects us to over 550 large companies from across the country and also globally. So many of you on today's call are representatives of some of those companies. And so we're excited to have you with us. We also want to take a moment and talk through and share with you that we recently opened up registration for our 2025 Disability in ADA celebration. That has historically been a virtual event, but this year it will be in person, and it will be located in the RTP area of Raleigh, and on the site, our site sponsor, host sponsor is Biogen. So we will be right there in some of your backyards to host this event. It's called A Future Without Limits for All Americans, and it's a celebration, again, of the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Here are just some of the details on the location. It'll be held on July 24th from 3 to 6 p.m. Again, on the campus of Biogen. So if you are interested, registration is now open. You can visit us at di-nc.org to register. We've also sent out an e-blast recently that includes options to register. I also want to bring to your attention, because again, as part of this business to business meeting, we put these in place for the purposes of growing our disability in North Carolina family. Many of you have participated in these. These are free, and that's wonderful. Some of you are members of our organization, but some of you are not. And so if your company is interested in joining Disability in North Carolina, now is the time to do that. We have come up with a opportunity to join at the gold level sponsorship for a 50% discount. We're already in June, and so half the year is gone. But we still want you as gold members to join Disability In. And so we are offering the full benefit of a gold sponsor at half the price right now. And that will include the benefits that you see here. I think the key piece is that in addition to the 4 complimentary registrations that you have to our fall conference, which is in October, we're also throwing in 2 additional complimentary registrations to any one of our events as well. That includes the ADA event that I just mentioned. So again, if you are thinking about joining our family here at Disability in North Carolina, now is the time to do that. So if you want additional information on that, you can reach out to myself or Pat Kuehl or Justin Francis on our team. We also have event sponsorship opportunities for the ADA event. So again, here's information on that. You don't have to be a member of Disability in North Carolina to sponsor the event. So if you have an interest in sponsoring this ADA celebration, again, reach out to Pat, myself, or Justin for additional information on that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Pat, I'm going to ask for you to watch the chat as well as we kind of talk through these slides, and looking forward to the conversation today. So,
amen. And folks, given that Beth has a vision issue, I'll be looking at these chats, and then I'll be shouting out to her to, give her a heads up on your question or your comment.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pat. So when we think about the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we can always start with the basics, and that is we know that we're coming up on the 35th anniversary of the signing of the ADA, July 26th of 1990. This was signed into legislation by President George H.W. Bush. It is an equal opportunity law. I mean, it basically, the purpose behind the ADA was to level the playing field, really, for people with disabilities related to employment. It is a non-discrimination law as well. So it was mirrored after the Civil Rights Act of '64. So who is covered? Again, this is all stuff that you guys have probably heard before. But an individual with a disability as defined by the ADA is one with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. You either have a record or a history of such an impairment, and you're perceived by or others or regarded as having an impairment. Again, the ADA does not provide an exhaustive list of the different types of disabilities that are qualified under, that qualify an individual with a disability, but there is some guidance that's given, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So to be considered a person with a disability, there are examples here of major life activities when we think about the definition of a disability, the substantial limitations of one or more major life activities that include, all of these, right? Walking, speaking, breathing, manual tasks, caring for yourself, learning, hearing, and seeing. So as I have shared before, and we talk about visible and non-visible disabilities, many of you know that I'm a person that was born with low vision. So I'm legally blind and have been since birth, but looking at me, And certainly when I go into interview for a job, you wouldn't know that. So I fall into that category of, 75% of the people with disabilities that have non-visible disabilities. So we'll talk about what that means. So Pat, you want to go ahead and I don't want to talk the whole time. You want to take this slide and talk
Sure.
through what.
Happy to. Happy to. And I think that the important element here is that a person can choose when they would like to disclose the disabilities. There's no obligation to do it at any particular time unless there's a time that works for you where you really need the support. So you could choose to disclose before you're even interviewed. You could choose to disclose while you're in the interview process. You could choose to disclose afterwards, but before you start your job, or you could choose to disclose after the offer, or any time within your employment history where it becomes evident to you that you might need an accommodation, and at that point you choose to disclose. So it's a personal choice, and it's a choice the individual can make. A question I get a lot of times is, if there's a box on an interview application, do I have to fill it out? And no, you don't. It's voluntary whether or not you disclose information about your disability. Now, at a later point, we'll talk a little bit about situations where disclosure is evident, whether or not the person says anything. All right, so here we are. Not all people with disabilities have visible disabilities. In fact, about 75% of people with disabilities have hidden ones, like Beth. You wouldn't know unless she chooses to tell you. But if I show up for an interview and I'm using a power wheelchair or a walker, or I have an obvious need for hearing aids or for a cane to help guide me, that's going to be self-evident. And at that point, what may happen is you may want to be prepared for that conversation because you show up and your disability is quite visible. Another way that can happen is if you have the accommodation of a job coach due to either autism or an intellectual disability. And that job coach comes with you to the interview and offers support to help you answer the questions and to demonstrate your skills and interest to the employer. That still does not open the door for a deep conversation around disability. Remembering that an interview is a process of figuring out how well you fit for a job and how well your skills can be displayed to the employer. It's not an opportunity to get into a deep conversation around disability. And we'll touch more on that in a little bit. Now, the other side of this is there are some risks to disclosing. If you disclose too early in the process or you disclose too much in the process, adding information that may not be useful to the decision process or useful to the dialogue you're having right then with your employer, it can cause difficulty moving forward. So we always want to tell people you got to weigh the risk versus benefits of when and how you disclose. Beth, back to you.
All right, thanks, Pat. And so when we think about the the decision to disclose, which is really what it is, as Pat said, it is an individual, and I know you guys don't like to hear that, and it is kind of that legal determinant of a case-by-case basis, right? I think what we encourage when we think about the conversation we have with students or individuals with disabilities, and even on the employer side, the more comfortable we are in our capabilities, right, in our ability to bring that talent and those skills to the job, I think the more comfortable you become in knowing what you might need. And so when we think again about the disclosure, it could be influenced again by having that visible or hidden disability, just as Pat said. If you are coming as a consumer or a client of the EIPD, or the Employment and Independence of People with Disabilities, formerly known as VR, there may be, right, that in and of itself, the employer may know that you have some type of disability because you're coming through that agency. The same for supported employment agencies, right? So there's kind of that underlying understanding, that if that employer is working directly with that agency, they're tapping into that talent pool intentionally through the relationships that they're establishing, right, with that agency. So similar to a service disabled veteran, staffing agency. The idea there is that those are trusted partnerships, right? So I've been on both sides, right? I've been where I have been an employer that has reached out. And, in some instances, it's a demonstration of good faith efforts for sure. And, ironically, and I know they're not on the call, but I occasionally will get these letters right here. Okay. And Tyson just sent me one, and I always respond. And it's that standard letter that says, hey, we support the employment of people with disabilities, and thank you so much for, your partnership, right? And all that's great and wonderful. But I have no idea who this HR manager is that sent me this letter, right? But it's a standard letter, and it's required in some compliance worlds, right? To demonstrate that good faith effort, to demonstrate that you have a relationship with EIPD or a supported employment agency because you are actively seeking diverse talent for your organization. Okay. But part of those relationships is building that trust. Okay. And Pat, I know you and I talk a lot about that, because then when you have an agency that is involved, those agencies are informing those candidates, or those in terms of the process of whether to disclose or not to disclose. And so, I have spent over 25 plus years managing accommodations teams that are working day to day on those interactive conversations around accommodations and disclosure. So, I know that it can be a difficult decision, but what I want you to understand today is the importance of taking time to establish the trust in those relationships and to build that pipeline of talent, that includes, again, in some instances, partnering, right, with EIPD or supported employment or these other agencies. But that
And
is
to
where,
that end, Beth, to, excuse me, to that end, I think it's critically important to keep the conversations focused on the essential functions of the job and what you, as the individual applying for the job, and possibly your support, possibly your job coach, can do to assure the employer that you can do those essential functions with the typical training that would take place. So when an employer recognizes I'm working with a job coach, sometimes they'll fall into the question, what kind of disability is it? And see, that's the conversation I want to redirect. And I want to direct back to, I understand why you're asking that question. I think it's at the heart of this. You want to know what we can do to support this as a successful placement for you. And here are the things we can do. So I don't dive into the, they have this and that neurological issue going on, this or that learning disability going on. I don't go there. A, it's not necessary. And B, it's not about to be helpful as far as the essential functions and the discussion of what the person can do. I redirect and say, we're here, and your question is a good one, and it's about capabilities. So let me tell you about the capabilities of this young man and let him answer some of your questions, and you'll see that he's on point, he's eager to be here, and he has the background and experience to assume this job.
yeah, I agree, Pat. And I think that's the key, is that in any interview, right, the questions that you ask should all be centered around the job that they're applying for, right? And the capabilities and the skills that they have related to that. So anytime that disability is mentioned, um, it should be related to my ability to perform the essential functions of that job that I'm interviewing for. Now, on the flip side of that, right? How many of us have ever gone into an interview and known exactly what every skill was going to be needed to be successful in that job, right? It's a new job. It's something that maybe you haven't done. How many of us can say we were hired into a job and that job that we were hired into is the same job you're doing, 10 or 12 years after you've been employed, right? Recognizing that things change. And I always challenge people with disabilities to say, you go in with confidence that is right for you. Okay. And in my experience, again, in my circumstances, and we'll talk specifically about some examples of that, and I'll share some of mine with you. But it really is dependent on the job that you're interviewing for, right? And what you will need to be successful. If you have a disability that does not require an accommodation, you don't really have any reason to disclose that, right? I mean, you just don't. That's just
Yeah.
you don't. I mean, if you're confident that you can do the job, and your disability is a non-issue. However, if you have a disability that's going to require additional time off work, right? Or if you're going to need, if you have certain times of the day that you have to administer medication, right? Where you have to leave the workplace and go do that, or whatever those things are, that's important for you to spend time and think about how you incorporate that into a conversation. But if it's not an issue, I again would recommend that don't make it an issue. And so again, stick to what you know about the job and about your capabilities. And so this next slide really does talk about the personal decision, right? Do you need an accommodation? One of the things that influences that decision to disclose should be um, looking at your past work, right, experience. How have you been successful in past employment? And that should determine, right, the direction that you take in that next opportunity. Um, and so if, for example, you've had no issue and you've had successful um, accommodations in past employment, then go to school off of what you learned from that experience. If, however, you have had employment experiences that have ended in disciplinary action or attendance issues that were maybe related to a medical condition, but you never disclosed that, or there were performance issues that were influenced by your disability, that's a time for you to step back and say, okay, how can I better advocate for myself, right? Before or during or after an interview, after a hiring decision. We spend time with students a lot talking about equipping yourself, right, with the tools that you need as you make that transition from college into that first job. And I know we've got some folks on the call today that have kind of navigated that recently. And so we want to spend some time today talking a little bit about those experiences and kind of how you've navigated your career and your transition from college to career, or any accommodation requests that you've had that you'd be interested in sharing or talking about. Would love to hear that.
As well as your questions and situations that you've been in where you didn't exactly know what direction to go in. So now's your time. This is a forum for an open discussion. Please open up your mics and share it
Yeah.
out.
Yes, if you have something that you want to share, would love to
Beth,
hear it.
I'd like to share something. This is Janet with EIPD. Years ago, I had a client who was in a wheelchair, and we went on lots of job interviews. He did great on the interviews, but never got the job. Um, our last interview and the job that he did get, I told him, I said, just go ahead and approach the elephant in the room as soon as you go in. And that is what he did, and that is the job that hired him, and he is still with that company today. Um, so, if it is a visual disability, go, that worked with him for that particular job.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it did. And he has been a great partner, for myself and the agency through the years. He's no longer in my area, but he's always been a great partner.
So that's such a great story because what he was able to convey is a level of confidence. You may be concerned that I might have some difficulty moving around here at the job. Let me allay those concerns.
Correct.
You may have some questions you want to ask me about my mobility, and I invite you to ask those that are work related. Go ahead. Um, sometimes we get questions about a person that presents with a job coach. You may be wondering why I need a job coach. The job coach helps me to learn the task more thoroughly and helps me to understand the demands of the role so that I can come up to the learning curve you need as quickly as possible. And we also know individuals that are not able to be quite that eloquent, in which case the coach needs to step in and say, I'm here not because John can't do the work. I'm here because I'm a support to him to learn the jobs, to learn them thoroughly, and to take some of the time and difficulty off of your trainers to make that training go more smoothly and facilitate his learning curve. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes you just have to address with confidence the elephant in the room and keep the conversation on the work. Here's somebody with a
Oh,
master's degree. Leanne, are you willing to talk?
Sure.
Go
I
for
was
it.
just sharing. Um, I recently just graduated the beginning of May with my master's, and I've been working at a new role. And I mean, in past roles, I've been working in like disability advocacy is a lot of what I've done in the past. So it was kind of integrated into what I've done. But this role is completely different and has nothing to do with disability, anything. So, but it's been a neat opportunity because I've gotten to share my experiences in an outside role, and I've gotten to talk with coworkers, and um, I've been able to join our ERN that we have, and connect with other people who have disabilities as well.
Super, Leanne. Thanks for your bravery there. Keith, I see you want to share a question or a comment. Please go
yeah.
forward.
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks. Yes, I graduated during the 2009 recession. So it was basically you were just happy to have a job. You didn't want to put anything potentially there. And that has stuck with me for most of my career of, not being able to advocate or ask or know anything about that. But, so I did not disclose on my previous role that I'm currently at, but around 4 years into it, my treatment manufacturing shortage, and there were some other things that came up, and I was basically suffering in silence to it till I finally did say, "Hey, I need something," because by missing days and so on, and they basically said that I was basically asking for a free pass to do whatever I wanted. And I was a business liability now and like very negative. And the fact that
Mhm.
uh, the manager stopped providing me work because of it. It was a very negative experience, and basically being justified of what that was just not a great place to be in. And at the same time, another place that I still am affiliated with, I was removed from a from a role because of an automatic didn't complete grading by a certain time, but explained to them the situation was going on, and they reinstated and gave me the support and everything that was there. So there was both a positive and a negative. But again, that whole concept of I don't want to ask or disclose proactively, but at the same time, how much can I go until maybe I one day don't show up because of something? In this case, I was without my medicine for a month, and that's something that helps me so that I can actually participate.
Yeah, and it can be a real delicate balance. When do you say something before it gets worse?
And I found, like, especially at the 4 year mark, it was very hard to differentiate between, people being curious and kind of trying to be friendly of asking, oh, what do you have going on or what's going on versus,
Yeah.
hey, this is HR or this is whoever. I can't just say, hey, treat this that way. I can't let my guard down. And I definitely put my guard down by treating it more as somebody that I trusted and friend versus, I should only have to say, hey, I have something going on and move from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I always caution people, be careful about how much you disclose, because you're under no obligation to go into a long discussion around your health condition, your mental health condition, or anything like that. Right. And number two, once you've said these things out loud, taking them back is hard. So better to keep it in the context of, I have some things going on. I'm going to be talking with HR about an accommodation, and feeling really positive that we can work something out because I really like this job. Again, the redirection back to why you're there and what you want to accomplish as an employee there, and not, diving into these more personal matters. It's a hard thing to do because in a lot of situations, people with disabilities are encouraged to share out a lot of information. Like right now, it's kind of in vogue to say, well, I have a mental health condition and I deal with depression or whatever. And all that is good stuff, and we don't judge that stuff. But is work the place for that conversation? I would submit no. I would submit that's a conversation with friends, family, people close to me that support me. But what I need from my employer is their confidence that I can do the work as long as I can learn the task and can adjust to changing situation that may be occurring because of my condition. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And I guess
Yeah.
kind of also with the accommodation versus at a certain point when to consider that accommodation may not be enough and maybe translating that into maybe short-term disability or some other option that may work if it's not
Absolutely.
something. I guess that kind of how do you, because I don't know if that would be proactively brought up as an alternative if it was a decent HR person, or if that's something I need to be aware of ahead of time going into what if they say no, or what if they can't accommodate just based off of whatever my job is for whatever
Right.
the
I'm going
reason.
to bounce it back to Beth because this is a dialogue, and people think this is just a straightforward, I need X, can you provide Y? Right. But it isn't. It's often a negotiation and a conversation, and it rests on that trust. So Beth, take it away.
No, well, it does, and I will be honest, because that's the space that I played in a lot, right? Is the HR space, and often, especially in bigger companies, the leaves folks in HR are not necessarily talking to the accommodations folks, right? Or they may be sitting in different places. Short-term and long-term disability may be sitting in different places. FMLA leave and leaves of absence are different. So it is important for you to ask, right, for consultation and get that on what all of those options might look like. Because to your point, sometimes it is about maybe taking a leave of absence to get medication adjusted, to get things sorted out, and then come back and transition back. But leaves of absences are an accommodation, right? So that is an option. Many times, there's that idea too around someone goes out on a leave of absence and they may have exhausted all of their leave under FMLA, but they still need some additional time. That too can be considered an accommodation under ADA, under qualifying circumstances, right? So it is important to understand who your point of contact is in HR, And if you are here on today's call and you're with a company and you represent HR, that too is really important for you as an organization to continue understanding how your accommodations process and how your leaves of absence processes may intersect at times as it relates to accommodations in this conversation. So.
Right. And I want to normalize this from the standpoint that, you know, if somebody was perfectly healthy and did a job for 4 or 5 years, God knows what else, and they're doing fine, and then all of a sudden they manifest a condition like cancer, we wouldn't hesitate to say, you're probably going to need some accommodation around getting your treatment. Maybe, maybe not. Some people get their treatment and go to work every single day. Others need to take periods of time off. It's when the D word comes in, when disability comes in, that it can get a little strange for us as well as for the people we're interacting with, because it seems like it's different. But actually asking for leave, asking for accommodation around a health condition is a fairly common thing.
Yeah,
Can I make a recommendation there?
Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed is that sometimes individuals wait too late to ask for that accommodation. It might be right when they're about to point out, or that they're about to get terminated for reasons and they haven't disclosed their disability.
Yes.
I'd like to recommend that individuals, disclose that as soon as you feel comfortable with it, so that you don't run into the potential of pointing out and losing the jobs because you have missed days with your disability.
That is such a great point. And it points up to me the thing about keeping in mind that these are not odd and unusual experiences. It happens every day that somebody manifests a health condition and needs to ask for time or needs to ask for accommodation around the treatment they're getting. So why wouldn't we do that when something pops up around our disability?
And mine was fear of disclosure, personally, of why it
Yeah.
was like that. Because I from past experiences or so on, now that I'm a little bit further along in my career,
Yeah.
seeing if there's a meeting with 2 or 3, executives on, not that scary, but if I was starting out 6 months into my career and had this happen like right out of college, I would be mortified, and thinking that when these people say, you need to tell me what your disability is or what is your disability, thinking that that is a requirement kind of. And I had a friend who kind of just went through that, where they requested the accommodations, and like there was a follow-up meeting with like 4 people, a director above that. Again, he's older, but still like that's got to be overwhelming a lot of times, especially if you're new, or like not realizing what
Sure.
your rights even are or aren't, and what you can versus what people can kind of lead you into saying or responding to.
Right, right. Well, I think the other side of this is the planning and the rehearsing of difficult conversations. Just like you prepare for an interview. If you're smart, you prepare yourself. You research the company, you anticipate questions, you anticipate how you're going to answer and how those are going to, factor into the essential functions, blah, blah, blah. But with disability, that next step, anticipating when you might need to disclose and how you would do it, practice the conversation with someone else, preferably somebody from EIPD or somebody like us, and get yourself prepared, because if you've rehearsed these difficult conversations, you're more likely to be able to stay on point and not lose the thread, so to speak.
This is Shannon Moore. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey,
Yes.
Shannon.
Hey, I just want to make a point. I'm not sure how all companies are, but most big corporations have, as we all already talked about, an HR department.
Mm-hmm.
You never have to tell your manager, your direct manager that you report to, about your health condition. But you can disclose it to HR, and that information will be kept confidential. No one that you work with needs to know anything. But if you do apply for an accommodation, your HR department will work that out. and your manager will just have to go with it, and they don't have a right to say anything about, I mean, they can weigh in on whether what you're asking for will allow you to do the job description. But otherwise, it's really best to go to HR first and not
Yes.
go to your manager.
Yeah, I would agree with you, particularly in a large organization where you have these rich resources. In small organizations or small employers, it may not be possible.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's true. The confidentiality piece, right, around this is that your manager, any information you share with the accommodations team or HR will be kept confidential to the extent that it can be, right? So you're right, Shannon. If a manager doesn't need to know the detail, they won't, be told that. And it is important. I know on the flip side of that, right, as an employee, you want to feel that support from your direct manager. So sometimes that feels a little hard. I think back to when I was new in employment myself, and my practice was to disclose. And there were times that, um, you know, it's I think of an example, and this was early in my legal career, right? So I'm an attorney and I passed the bar exam and I go into an interview, and I didn't disclose, but my resume back in the old days, right, when we had paper resumes, and I was a member of the American Blind Lawyers Association, and I had also received an award that was associated with a disability. And I remember the managing partner in this firm looked at my resume and he looked at me and he goes, "What are you, blind?" Is exactly what he said. And I am sitting there going, and this was in like 1994, I think. Okay, so I'm old. And the ink wasn't dry on the ADA yet, but it caught me, right? I was like, what did he just say? And I know when those words came out of his mouth, he was thinking, what did I just say? Right. And I looked at him in that moment and I said, as a matter of fact, I am. And that's all I said. And I think he was so shocked. And at the end of the day, I didn't get that job. I didn't get a second interview with that firm. But what that did for me is two things. One is that whole idea of, do I want to keep my resume, right, with the indicators on it without me saying anything? And actually I did, because that gave me a lot there. That was an opportunity for me to make a decision about whether I wanted to be in that kind of an environment or not, right? I just decided, I'm not sure that firm is the right place for me anyway. So that was an example. But I think in every one of those experiences, and I know those that are on this call understand what I'm saying, every interview brings a little bit, uh, you know, of a tweak to your process, right? Whether you're going to disclose, how you move into those kinds of conversations. Again, I think, Shannon, to your point too, is that conversation with human resources, knowing who and when to bring it up is important. And you get better every time you do it, I think. As Pat said, it's almost the preparedness of a job interview, right? And how are you going to present yourself? This is part of your presentation. And so the more time you spend in kind of
Exactly.
tweaking that, I think it could be a benefit.
We have a question from Keith. Do we know if confidentiality of disclosure is an HR, state law, or a federal law, or both?
Well, and I think that, I mean, in terms of the ADA and the practice, right? There is a level of confidentiality that falls under the ADA in terms of the need to know, I think, is how they talk about it. So when you're going through the accommodation process and you disclose a disability, HR, is charged with sharing that information only with those that have a need to know. So if somebody, needs to share in order to, coordinate an accommodation or gather the medical information that's needed to more clearly define what accommodations are going to work, then yes, there's a level of need to know there. But in terms of the actual state specific or federal law, again, I think it's that practice of confidentiality within the context of the interactive process.
Right. Remembering that there's HIPAA laws that cover all medical
that's what I was gonna
information.
say.
And we all need to assume that people want their medical information to be held safely and tightly in confidentiality.
Right. And you're referencing HIPAA, right? I think,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes, I am.
Right. And so HIPAA is one of those laws that we talk a lot about in HR. And I will say that in terms of the ADA, right, and HIPAA, there's not it's a voluntary self-disclosure process, right? So the information that you're engaging in when you're in that interactive conversation around accommodations is information that's coming from you, right? As opposed to a benefit or an insurance healthcare information. So there is a distinction in terms of that piece of it. But again, right, the good practice is, don't
Right.
don't share confidential information with those that don't have a need to know.
So, Beth, we have a really great question from Tracy, who is the mother of a young man who's 16 years old. She has disclosed the disability is Asperger's, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. And this young man has felt that he needed to tell his employer these things right at the get-go, but has resulted in no job interviews and no offers. So moving forward, here's the question. What are some things we need to consider when he applies for future jobs? I would definitely take all of those labels and never use them in an interview. I would highly, highly recommend you not walk in and say, I've got this, this, and this, and this. What you should be saying is, I can do this. I'm really good at that. I'm really interested in learning this. And I think I can be an asset to your company. And oh, by the way, if they happen to have EIPD services or a job coach, my job coach helps facilitate my learning. And
That's great
it.
feedback. Thank you so much, Patricia. And just for clarification, I'm sharing his diagnosis in this group setting only. He did not list that in any of his applications, but I think it was a question he had to respond to. And it asked if you had a disability. He said yes, and then he got redirected to some other online assessments. He couldn't recall all of the questions, but he said there were multiple choice, kind of situational type questions. If a client came in or customer come in, how would you handle this situation? But he hadn't heard back from them, and I was just kind of wondering, it's a tough spot to be in as a parent. You want him to be truthful and honest, and he did not want my help with the application or assessment. He wanted to do it on his own. So I let him do that, but it's also kind of heartbreaking because in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, is he being screened out? Is he being discriminated against? I have no proof of that.
Yeah. All right. So here's the central question. Was he applying for jobs that he has the skill and ability to do, including the customer interaction?
Yes.
Then I would not have disclosed.
Okay.
Because unless there's a reason why he shouldn't be applying for a job with a heavy emphasis on customer appreciation, why would we label that? Why?
Yeah, if it's
also,
not
everybody
that
has
was
to
my question
learn.
for asking.
Yeah.
We forget that young people without disabilities make mistakes on job. The average person starting out goes through about 5 jobs before they hit on one that lasts. And there's a reason for that, because everybody has a learning curve. We're all young once and make silly decisions. Right?
Yeah.
Pat, can I interject something here?
Please.
I help a lot of individuals with applications.
Yeah.
And Tracy, in regards to your son, the application, when it went to the personality assessment and asked you these different questions, a lot of your box stores have those types of questions on their online applications.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, usually what I have experienced is when they say yes, they have a disability, when they're using that online application, they go to a different part of the application
Right.
and they're completing information for a tax credit. And that information, if a company is using online applications, the majority that I have worked with, that does not go to the hiring company. That goes to a third party vendor to get that information so the company can get a tax
Mm-hmm.
credit.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that, but it's also possible that in some cases, people are making some assumptions about the person's capability as a customer service um, point of contact by virtue of giving those additional questions. Here's another thing you can do, Tracy. Grab hold of some of those applications and practice with your son. The more you prepare for these interviews, the more you prepare for thinking through these things, that knowledge is not wasted. He might well get in a situation where an angry customer, approaches him inappropriately, and what would he do about that? Why not prepare him ahead of time for it and think it through? Even down to the level of, is this the job you want? If you know this might happen. But you can't over prepare. It's really, really important to stress that particularly young people need to prepare, and they're scared to do it because it feels a little weird to do that with mom or with my EIPD counselor or whatever. Weirdly, they'd rather face it with the interviewer having not prepared ahead of time. I always go, why are you nervous about doing this with me? And you're going to take the biggest risk of all and do it with your employer, right? Preparation is really, really important. Tracy, I hope that helped.
Oh, I'm sorry?
I'm saying I hope that helped.
It helped a lot. I really appreciate it. He's picking up our youngest son from camp right now. So I'm going to share all this feedback with him when he returns.
Well, he must be a very responsible young man. And I
Oh,
think that,
he is.
well, here's the deal. A lot of times we don't prepare young people with a good laundry list of their capabilities and empower them to be able to speak those out. And that is so important. There's this false modesty thing, you shouldn't be telling people that you're good at this and you're good at that. But an interview is the point of an interview is to tell somebody what you're good at. Why would you go in there and say, I can't do this and I can't do that? What would that? That's just goofy, right? Speaking of which, we have about 6 minutes. Beth, I'd love you to tell your story of your first job out of college, because it's a real illustration of how you adjust and adapt to things that people might have weird expectations about you.
Yeah, I know. Well, it is, and I think the cool part of this story is that it did end up, the way it did. So, as I said, right, I have the option of disclosing or not disclosing, because coming in and looking at me, you wouldn't know that I had a disability. And so, unless you see me looking at my phone or, see me carrying around this giant magnifying glass that I could use as a weapon too, because it's so heavy. But in this particular case, I interviewed for, I had graduated from law school. I had passed the bar exam, but and so started looking for a job, but I was not well networked. Okay. So I was not getting a lot of legal job interviews at that point. So I went to a local department store and interviewed for a counter manager position at a cosmetics counter. Okay. And yes, you said I'm legally blind. And yes, I am. You heard me correctly. I am. But I've also worn makeup for a long time. All right. By this time, it was a long time. They had skincare products and all these things. And I was like, gosh, I mean, I know about, I know how to put makeup on anyway. This would be kind of fun. So I went in and interviewed, and I did not disclose that I had a disability, a vision problem. And I got the job and proceed to learn about the industry. It was one of those jobs where you match the foundation, right? So you were constantly, matching the color foundation to the customers as they came in. And that was easy enough. And so as counter manager, I was also doing inventory. So I had my magnifying glass and the small colors, the names, the print on the boxes. I would just drop to the floor with my magnifying glass and get in these drawers and look for the colors and all that stuff. But it was all fine, right? What I learned is that you can also be really creative, because part of my job was also to consult with the customers as they came up. Some would want you to apply, the product. They'd come in for application or a makeover kind of thing. And so in the process of applying the foundation and so forth, you have a eyeliner. Okay, so for those that are familiar with what that is, right, that is a pencil with a sharp point on the end that goes around your eye. So instead, right, I'm thinking that's probably not a good idea for me to try and apply the eyeliner. So instead, I hand the customer the pencil and I said, let me show you how to apply it. And I proceed to walk them through it. And what that did was it eliminated my need to put anybody in harm's way, right? And get it up around their eyebrow, because that's what it just would not have been pretty. But they think, right, because I'm the expert and the counter that they're getting a lesson, a professional lesson, right, from a makeup person. So that really was an opportunity for me to recognize the power that I had as an individual with a disability, right, in that kind of a situation. So I share that to say, think about ways that you can use that disability and those situations to your advantage, right? Especially in a customer service kind of a role like that. And that worked out. Now, the rest of that story ends like this, which I share a lot with my college students and other professionals that get those degrees, like a law degree, and pass the bar, then find themselves working at a cosmetics counter. Okay. One of my best customers in that situation happened to have a husband who was a partner in a law firm. And that is how I networked and found my first legal position. So I was at that counter selling cosmetics when she learned about my legal background, and that I was looking for an opportunity. And in that networking, I landed my first legal position. So I say that because it's important for us to remember, you got to get yourself out there, right? It may not be your dream job yet, and that's okay, but getting yourself out there in the way, right, in the path of those people that can see what you do, see how you communicate, see how you navigate things, that open doors for your end goal, which is your career and your next opportunity. So I share that with you just to encourage you. Yeah, it was a great life lesson for me, for sure. And again, want to encourage you to think through this, right? To think through what your decision is to disclose, and spend some time in equipping yourself with the tools that you need to navigate some of these conversations.
So we're at the end of our time for today, but this has been a great discussion and we so much appreciate your input. Is this something you guys would like to continue, that we revisit this conversation, or each month we try to come up with something interesting and compelling?
I think this was great. And I definitely want to refer some of my clients to get on here and to listen and to participate. I have some who are very quick to disclose their disabilities when they don't need to. And I think this, they hear from me all the time not to do it, bam, bam,
Yeah.
bam, especially those individuals that are on the spectrum. And
Yeah.
I think hearing this information from someone other than me, and my coworkers would be great.
Super. Maybe we can work something out, for the student population, and be another voice to add to yours.
Thank you.
We'd love to.
Absolutely. And I want to thank the employers
And
too.
Keith is saying, yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I want to thank the employers too for sharing some of their experiences today. We know this can be a tough thing to navigate. And that's why we think this is an important topic. So, we're welcome to, as Pat said, your feedback. If we want to carry this discussion over into another month or another B2B, we'd be happy to do that. Any other closing comments?
Well, we thank you very much for your time. Also reminding you that this is a recording and it will be posted on our website. So you're free to, air it with students or other individuals you want to support.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you all.
And we
again.
hope to see you in Raleigh at Biogen.
Yes.
Come and see us in the flesh. We'd love to enjoy some music with you, enjoy some refreshments, talk about the ADA and the benefits that have come to the world because of the ADA. We really, really hope you'll come. I will send each of you an invite following this event today.
Yes. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.